Today, Mobile Suit Gundam is known as one of the most popular and expansive mecha franchises that has ever existed. It is kind of weird to take yourself back to a time when Gundam was only a handful of series. Sure, nowadays it's a no-brainer to think that the next installment of Gundam is right around the corner, or at least being worked on. Back in 1986, though, the future was much more uncertain. Sunrise had just completed Mobile Suit Gundam Double Zeta, and while that series is a nice bookend to the original run of the Universal Century, it was also the most polarizing of the 3 Gundam series released up to that point. With Char's Counterattack still being a few years away, and the concept of a giant, all-encompassing franchise not really being a thing yet, Sunrise did what they believed to be the next best thing: create a franchise that could be the next Mobile Suit Gundam. Metal Armor Dragonar is basically a Gundam show in all but name. Its creative staff was composed of a ton of Gundam veterans, and its original creator is credited as Hajime Itate, the pseudonym that a collective of Sunrise staff used on many projects throughout the years. The anime features a story that is essentially a rework of the original Mobile Suit Gundam, with the main characters joining the Federation against their will and duking it out with the spaceborne Giganos Empire. Hell, they even had Kunio Okawara do the mechanical designs for this series mecha, and he was the man behind both the RX-78 and the iconic Zaku designs, as well as a ton of others for the Gundam series. Of course, we live in 2024 now, so we know that Metal Armor Dragonar, despite actually being fairly popular at its time of release, never really took off, and Gundam would go on through highs and lows to survive until this very day. The fact that in another universe we might be watching Metal Armor Dragonar the Warlock from Pluto is a pretty funny thought. While Dragonar did eventually fade into obscurity, there are a lot of things about this show that I actually really enjoy. It has some great 80s mecha designs, characters with believable stories that lead to real growth. So kick back for the next 40 minutes or so as we explore the world of Metal Armor Dragonar and experience the beginning of an 80s franchise that never panned out. Metal Armor Dragonar opens in the year 2087. Mankind has left planet Earth and has begun living in colonies out among the solar system. One faction of colonies centered around a major city on the moon's surface declares itself independent from the ever-ubiquitous Earth Federation, and war ensues. This faction, known as the Giganos Empire, is portrayed as a fascistic oligarchy that lives under military rule, and despite being smaller and having less resources than the Federal Army, there's one thing that gives the upstart empire an edge: metal armors. Yes, much like Zeon in Mobile Suit Gundam, having a mecha that can destroy entire battleships with ease seems pretty OP. Where Dragonar differs from Mobile Suit Gundam, though, is in its trio of protagonists. Kane Wakaba is the main hero and goes from layabout punk with a Yusuke Urameshi hairdo to a confident ace throughout the course of the series. While it might be easy to compare him to Amuro, he's actually a lot more like Judo from Double Zeta in that he has a lighthearted attitude and often looks out for himself early on. Tap Oceano comes from a huge family and is originally from Brooklyn, and while he usually goes along with Kane's less than mature schemes, Tap is always portrayed as a loyal friend and competent ally. Finally, Light Newman is the most charismatic of the three and mostly used as the group's straight man. Light is almost always the most level-headed during the various situations in the show, and also he kinda looks like a young sci-fi Glenn Howerton for some reason. These three are our teenage heroes who are caught up in the war when Giganos attacks their home colony, and much like the hero of Mobile Suit Gundam, they sort of stumble into these prototype mecha referred to as the D-weapons, or Dragonar. Each mecha has a distinct design and purpose in combat. The D1, piloted by Kane, is a good all-rounder that has dual beam sabers for melee combat. It also starts out with this really interesting looking head unit that can dock and undock, but that is disposed of not long into the runtime. The D2 is piloted by Tap and is actually my favorite out of all of them. I love the dark color scheme and it has a Gundam heavy arms feel to it, but of course 10 years earlier, so with a distinct 80s flair. The D2 is used for a lot of heavy fire support and ranged combat in the series and is most often paired with the D1 in combat. Finally, Light pilots the D3, which is probably the most unique looking mecha in the series with its saucer head. While the D3 is pretty weak in combat, mostly relying on standard rifles and other beam weapons, its real strength lies in recon and intelligence gathering. The huge saucer head is actually a full sensor suite, complete with radar equipment. The D3's ability to gather information rivals that of a Federation battleship in sensor strength and accuracy, with it also being much smaller and more maneuverable. What I really like about this difference between the three main suits is that the D3 often attempts to stay hidden during combat. While Light is a good pilot and is more than a match for Gigantos grunts, they decide fairly early on in the series that it's just not worth the risk of damaging the D3's intricate and expensive sensor equipment. It adds an extra layer to all the combat encounters in this show, and when mecha anime can very easily become waves of suits shooting at each other in the void of space, well, the added measure of complexity is definitely welcomed. So the guys accidentally pilot the Dragonar, which means that the AI operating system locks them in as the only operators of those suits. Oh yeah, they also all have an AI in them, but it's used so sparingly that I totally forgot about it for most of the show. The trio fights through the colony and outside, where they witness the destruction of their home via a Gigantos weapon called the Mass Driver. Basically, they have a big cannon that shoots a rock and it smashes the colony, cheap and effective. Kane immediately freaks out when witnessing the destruction, as his mother is an air traffic controller on the station. They take the weapons to a refugee ship, hoping to find her there, but instead they're detained by Federation forces, who demand to know how they got their hands on the D-weapons. Kane cannot forget the sight of the colony being destroyed, and despite being told by the captain of the ship that he could be executed for stealing military hardware, he runs off with Tap and Light in tow to take the mech once again. Unfortunately, they're caught and thrown in the brig when Kane straight up demands a rescue ship to search the rubble, but a girl with long blonde hair named Linda takes pity on them and lets them out. Kane is immediately taken with Linda, and she somehow begins to like him as well, even though the three pilots act like a bunch of knuckleheads for the first 20 episodes or so. Once they have the mechs in their hands, they decide to search the ruins, hoping to find any clues as to whether or not Kane's mother could be alive. What they actually find is 3 Gigantos metal armors that they skirmish with, and then a Gigantos spaceship that they end up blowing up. While they find no trace of Kane's mom, they do gain a little bit of prestige among the people of the refugee ship. Now, instead of being told that they might be executed, the 3 are basically conscripted to serve as the Dragonar pilots, at least until they can make it to a Federation base and get the pilot registration changed. So for the first full arc of Metal Armor Dragonar, we follow Kane, Tap, and Light as they battle Gigantos forces and make their way towards Earth. Things aren't that straightforward, as the Dragonar themselves are actually designed by a Gigantos scientist who defected, and the Empire considers the prototypes stolen property. So the Federation's idea is to hide the Dragonar aboard a refugee ship and literally use the citizens as a shield. And that ends up being way more trouble than it appears to be worth. Along with our main 3, the Dragonar cast rounds out with Sergeant Ben Rooney, the imposing man that is put in charge of these 3 goobers and turns them into effective pilots, and to make sure that they don't cause too much trouble. Besides the random military members aboard the ship, the guys also deal with the refugees, namely the 3 girls that they seem to inevitably be paired up with. Linda and Rose pair well with Kane and Tap respectively, and Light seems to have a thing for the mysterious Diane. The funny thing is, Kane and Linda go through a lot over the course of the series, and I think that their relationship is actually really well done. It helps that they have actual chemistry together, like Kane goofs off and acts like you would expect a cocky 16-year-old to, but Linda doesn't really get annoyed at it. She usually actually laughs along with the guy's antics. Rose is the youngest of everyone, and Tap ends up treating her almost more like a younger sister than a love interest. Which makes sense for his character since he comes from a big family, and really Rose just chases after them because, well, what else are you gonna do on a refugee ship that could explode at any moment? Light and Diane share a few moments together, but it peters out fairly quickly. Diane has way more going on that is revealed later, and I find it interesting that they both agree that nothing would work out between them, but they still enjoy each other's company a few times anyway. Overall, the inter-character writing and relationships in Metal Armor Dragonar are very enjoyable to watch unfold, and it's probably the strongest overall piece of the show. The Empire of Giganos isn't all faceless grunts either, as the Dragonar come up against a Giganos ace relatively frequently. Known as the Blue Hawk, Mayo Plato and his squad of elite trainees are tasked with hunting down the stolen Dragonar and either capturing or destroying them. Mayo is an important character throughout all of Metal Armor Dragonar's runtime, and the blonde-haired pilot has more in common with Char from Mobile Suit Gundam than just looks. For one, it's revealed fairly early on that he and Linda are siblings, and that he has a vendetta against his father, the same scientist who stole the Dragonar and gave them to the Federation. Around episode 4, the refugee ship is able to rendezvous with the Federal Space Fleet, and while the main trio originally thought they would be taken off the Dragonar's registry and replaced, it unfortunately isn't that simple, and they may have to serve as the Dragonar pilots until they get all the way to Earth. The Federation's main space weapons are pretty similar to the ball mobile suits in Mobile Suit Gundam, and these things are just no match for the Empire's metal armors, illustrating to the audience just how important it is that the Dragonar make it to Earth. Also, you don't really get to see these things too much after this. Okay, I'll stop making Mobile Suit Gundam comparisons now, but I mean, they put Bright right in the background of a shot in this show, so I can't really help it. Mayo Plato has been harrying the escort fleet and slowly whittling down their defenses, and his plan is to blow up the Idaho. He figures, after all he's seen during their battles, that the pilots are novices, so if they launch an all-out attack on the Dragonar, they'll stay inside the ship and inevitably they'll go down with it. But you know, the Federation commander's like, why would we let the ship explode and lose the Dragonars instead? Kane receives a good luck charm from Linda, a big chunky bracelet that's a family heirloom, and is heavily featured in the opening, and I love how she's like, don't worry, it's cheap. The Dragonar arrive on the battlefield, but they ignore Lieutenant Loba's commands to hang back and go all out on the Giganos ship. They do blow it up, but are separated from their squadron and are set adrift in the dark of space. The guys actually drift so long that they pass out from lack of oxygen, and when they wake up, they've been captured by a guy named Lieutenant Japther. Doesn't losing consciousness from lack of oxygen give you brain damage in like 2 minutes? Wow, they're lucky. Japther is a Giganos soldier that lives alone on an old salvage ship. He realizes that he's found something special in the 3 metal armors and hostages, and thinks that by turning them in to the Empire he'll gain some status, and in turn not have to spend his days wallowing alone on an old salvage ship. Well, the guys are way harder to keep captive than he thinks, and he ends up having to chase them all about the ship, and they finally come to a ceasefire when they're reduced to throwing beer bottles and plates at each other. The ceasefire doesn't last too long, as the 3 pilots from Plato's squad arrive. They tell Kane, Tap, and Light that the Idaho was actually captured after the battle and was sent off to a Giganos colony so that all of the refugees could be sent away to a work camp. Japther gets in an argument with the pilots about who should be the one to take the Dragonar pilots back to the Empire, and then Dan just shoots him in the chest. In a last moment of defiance, Japther cuts Kane's hands free from his bindings, which allows them to escape with the Dragonar. With our 3 main heroes beginning to have some character development, they decide to head to the Giganos colony and rescue the Idaho. While at the start of the series I think they would have just taken off at their first opportunity, now they each have a reason to take the ship back. They actually get pretty far fairly easily as they steal the empty ship that Japther had and even trick the comms officer at the colony into letting them land. We get to see a speech given by the big fat Giganos officer with an awesome mustache. It's here where they throw out the old classic Sieg Heil too, and then give a speech about how Earth is full of a bunch of idiots and they're the superior race. Of course, Zeon and Gundam also started out as a pretty basic take on Nazis in space, as well as the Empire from Star Wars. The aesthetic is striking, and it immediately identifies them as the bad guys. Now, Zeon had the benefit of being fleshed out way more in series and prequels over the years, so they've evolved away from that fairly basic fascist allegory into kind of something else entirely. Giganos in Metal Armor Dragonar does not have that benefit, so they end up just kind of being pretty straightforward in their villainy. When the most righteous character in your faction only wants to kill some of the people living on Earth and still believes he is racially superior, yeah, you're kind of the bad guys. Kane and Tap go to find the refugees, even knocking out some guards and stealing their uniforms. Hopefully it doesn't end up like Spaceballs. Kane and Tap are able to attack the guards that are loading the refugees into separate ships, and then sneak into their group undetected. During this time, we learn that Linda is Mayo's sister, and their father is the one who created the Dragonar and then fled with them to the Federation. Light, who's been back at the D3, uses his sensor suite and his mech's AI to hack into the colony's defense systems and simulate a huge Federation attack on their radar. Of course, the Giganos commander comes up with the most evil plan possible and sends the Idaho, filled with the refugees and other hostages, out as a meat shield. Tap then rigs a cassette player to a bomb somehow, and they use it as a timer, and once the Idaho is far enough away, they blow up the entire goddamn colony and kill like 20,000 people. But wow, Dragonar is serious, and they basically never bring this up again either, besides Mayo, who's traveling alone through space in his metal armor after the battle, swearing vengeance on Kane, who he now knows is the pilot of the main Dragonar. Unfortunately for Mayo, he's told by his superiors not to bother engaging with the Idaho as it attempts to land on Earth. For one, it is out of his jurisdiction. Mayo is a royal guard, and he has other duties to attend to. Giganos' leadership is also starting to lose confidence in the Blue Hawk's abilities, which makes sense. I mean, he's failed to capture the Dragonar 4 or 5 times at this point. It's the same problem that Char has in the original Gundam series. Yeah, he's an ace pilot and he smokes everybody that he comes across until he fights our main characters. And that causes him to go on a series-long losing streak. At least with Char, he has the ultimate goal of revenge for his family. Mayo doesn't have much going on until near the finale of the series, and ultimately he feels like a bit of wasted potential. There's a fun battle while the Idaho attempts atmospheric re-entry, a staple of any good mecha space action show, and ultimately the Dragonar and a bunch of reinforced pods full of refugees land safely in the ocean to be picked up by a Federation aircraft carrier. The Federation fleet ends up stopping in a Scandinavian town called Orland due to the refugees refusing to go to a camp. We get to see the devastation of the Empire's mass driver firsthand, as the once bustling town has been reduced to nothing more than a crater ringed by crumbling ruins. After a fight with some Giganos metal armors that look like big motorcycles, no, Victory Gundam, you stay in the memory hole, go away. Some of the refugees decide to stay in Orland to rebuild, but man, there's not very many of them, and that city is fucking gone. They're gonna end up in a Blue Gender style shanty town, but at least they won't get eaten by giant bugs anytime soon. Hey, did you know that Light's father is a member of the British House of Lords and a bigwig in the Federation Parliament named Lord Vermont? Well, that little tidbit of information gets dropped, and then we literally never hear about it ever again. It's actually a pretty big disappointment because all 3 main characters have great story hooks that could have led to some emotional arcs, but instead the show does something else entirely, but we'll get there soon enough. Besides Light's father never really being followed up on, Tap's family living in Brooklyn is only brought up a few times, and I was really expecting at least a few episodes dealing with them, especially because the show goes out of its way to point out that New York is where a lot of the fighting has taken place in North America. And then there's a whole episode where they get to Earth and Tap gets a letter from home, and he keeps getting interrupted before he can read it, and it's like, oh, I bet that's some bad news, like his kid brother is probably dead or being forced to work for the Empire or something, but no, it's pretty much nothing, and we never get to see them. Now, the guys are supposed to have their registrations removed at the Federation base in Scandinavia, but Giganos gets really nervous about the Dragonar being mass-produced now that they are in the hands of the Federation proper. So the Empire just shoots the mass driver at the city, which I'm sure kills a lot of people, but they pretty much miss the base and the Dragonar are fine. However, in a twist of fate, the machine that would remove the Dragonar's pilot lock was destroyed. So now the plan is to send them with the Dragonar to North America, where the procedure can be done, and they're even given promotions all the way to lieutenant. This makes them higher ranked than Sergeant Rooney, and it's pretty fun to see them torture him by waving their rank around. Side note, I actually really love the relationship that these guys have with Rooney. He starts out as a pretty standard, gruff, superior type guy, but gradually softens over time. By the end, Rooney is almost like a father figure to the three pilots, and there are even quite a few examples of him laughing along with their antics and really believing in them. Rooney is a grade A character and one of my favorites in Dragonar, and he takes a stereotypical character archetype that could have been super one-dimensional and bends it into something much more human. And now we get an arc of travel as a fleet of ships transport the Dragonar to North America. We get a scene where Kane, Tap, and Light train for combat in Earth's gravity by flying fighter jets, and I don't know why this seems like it jumps the shark a bit, but for me, it sorta does. You can put these 16-year-olds in future mecha and my brain is totally fine with it, but seeing them fly modern military equipment is pretty weird. I mean, how long do you have to train in a simulator before you get actual flight time? And here's Kane fucking around in a F-16 only a week or two after the start of the show. One of the new additions that the guys get here on Earth is a flight pack. At first, only the D1 has one, but it comes in really handy as they engage Giganos forces while traveling on the ocean. Finally, the convoy arrives in North America, traveling upriver to NORAD HQ. While this seems like it must be the end of the journey for Kane, Tap, and Light, this is far from reality, as the guys are told that they cannot be removed as the pilots of the Dragonar. This time it's because removing them would wipe all of the data from the mech's computers, and that battle data is invaluable to the Federation because they plan on creating a mass production mecha model. At first the guys protest, but they're told that Linda, Rose, and Diane will also be traveling to China and they need an escort. The reasons why the three girls are headed there are kept secret, something that Light brings up multiple times. Before they hit the road again, Mayo convinces his superior, General Powell, to let him have one more shot at the Dragonar. He ends up sneaking onto the base after assuming the identity of a federal major, and Diane finally reveals that she isn't an innocent young refugee, she's actually a federal intelligence agent and figures out Plato's identity. Unfortunately, not before he and his men plant a bunch of bombs everywhere, and then Linda sees him and thinks that everyone will hate her for being from Giganos, so she runs off during the battle. It's a whole big mess. Kane retrieves her and tells her that he doesn't care if she's from Giganos, and it seems to work, along with the fact that I think this is the episode where he just like slaps the shit out of her. Having failed for like the 8th time, Mayo Plato is told by his superior, General Powell, that he's taken off duties concerning anything to do with the Dragonar. He tries to argue, but these are direct orders from Marshal Giltor, the man in charge of the entire Giganos army, and a man that Mayo looks up to most in the world. Linda is given some news from Diane that completely shocks everyone. Her father, Professor Plato, is actually alive, and the story of his death was mostly a cover-up by Giganos. Currently he's in China, and they'll be meeting with him when they arrive at the Federation base. Linda has mixed feelings about this. She harbors disdain for her father, because she believes that he left her family to build machines of war. By the end of the episode, Linda admits that she wants to see her father, and we get a really cool shot to end it off. Linda isn't the only one with daddy issues. In the very next episode, it's revealed that Kane's father is actually a major in the Federation military and like the second in command of this entire theater of war. It's actually a big position. Kane absolutely hates his father to the point where when he sees him get out of the plane on the flight deck, he immediately walks off and says he quits. Kane's parents were divorced when he was young, and he never really got over it. And by the end of the episode, Kane realizes that he's being kind of a shit, and launches in the D1 to help save his dad from some Giganos metal armors. This episode isn't bad. In fact, I quite enjoyed it, but the problem is it's almost all filler. I could have totally skipped over covering this episode, because Kane's father is never seen again. And I think they only mention him once outside of this. Again, it's just an example of how Metal Armor Dragonar presents some really great story hooks, and then just completely ignores them. This is then followed up by more filler, but at least it's a unique episode where the guys attack a base on foot with Sergeant Rooney and his men. Also, the Giganos base commander gets a crazy death, so I wanted to mention it. The convoy arrives in Shanghai, and it doesn't take long for the guys to get into even more trouble. They almost get assassinated at a restaurant and end up saving this weird old guy that keeps following them. Turns out this old dude is actually Professor Plato, and it's a good thing that they were in the exact restaurant he was, or the guy would be dead, I guess. He takes them to a dress shop, and they pick out a dress that he wants to give to Linda. Also, props to Dragonar for having a gay-coded character in the dress shop and not making him a huge pervert or something. A good job, Metal Armor Dragonar, especially for the late 80s. The professor isn't able to see Linda before he goes back to HQ, but she does show up on the deck wearing the dress that he bought. And we get the sense that maybe these two can reconcile a little easier than Kane and his father. The Dragonar are finally turned over to the engineers in China, and the guys enjoy basking in the limelight a little bit, even having a big parade thrown in their honor. Kane, Tap, and Light are given the option to stay in the military or resign their positions and be granted a sum of $2 million. Yeah, I know which one I would take. However, Kane gets really upset when he's told that the Dragonar will be dismantled because they're all calibrated specifically for the three guys and no one else could effectively pilot them. Giganos attacks the base hoping to destroy the facility, but Kane, Tap, and Light jump back in their mechs and take care of business, officially staying with the military. While this seems a little illogical given that their goal for the entire show was to be free from piloting the Dragonar, I guess going back to normal life isn't very appealing in the middle of a war against space fascists that want to ethnically cleanse you. The guys spend 2 months at the base while Professor Plato promises to upgrade the Dragonar into much more powerful machines. I think it's unfortunate that the Dragonar don't get any sort of visual upgrade. They are supposedly much more powerful than they were before, but they look the same and they don't have any new weapons, so it's really not immediately recognizable. At this point, the war begins to change, as the mass-produced Federation metal armor known as the Dragoon have been deployed and engaging Giganos on every front of the war. While the Dragonar are benched for a few months, the new Federation mechs do a real number on Giganos, and the war goes from a Earth-wide blitzkrieg to a stalemate. The next arc of the show is regrettably a sore spot for me. We're introduced to a new villain named Gundam, a Giganos colonel who is a brash psychopath that looks and acts like he came right from Fist of the North Star. And while Fist of the North Star with mechs sounds like a fucking great concept, and it is, the problem with this arc is that it takes around 14 episodes of the show, and you could honestly skip most of it if you wanted to. Almost a third of this entire show is dedicated to dealing with this annoying asshole and his captains, which he calls his 4 heavenly kings. While there are some great episodes and moments in the stretch of Metal Armor Dragonar, as Kane, Tap, and Light create the Dragonar Commando Squad to hunt down a secret facility in the Chinese wilderness, it could have been half as long and twice as good. My major gripe with this part is it focuses way too much on Gundam and his men. Sometimes an episode will go for 7 or 8 minutes before we even see the main characters, and when the show's been fairly lighthearted up until this point, taking special care to show the guys interact with members of the crew and get into antics, well, it's a special kind of whiplash for the show's main focus to now be on a bunch of murderous rapists. Yeah, all of Gundam's men are bad dudes, and no one in the Empire even likes them, commonly referring to the unit as the trash of Giganos. Each of the captains are pretty one-note, so it's not especially interesting to spend much time with them outside of the fights. What you end up with is a 14-episode arc that has basically no character development for the main cast, and while we're told destroying the secret metal armor factory is very important, it never really seems all that urgent, especially when the episode previews make it a point to show how the Dragoon battalions are making good progress, pushing Giganos off the planet on every major front. Gundam himself has a cool design at least, and he has a big mech that wields a giant sword, which gives the Dragonar pilots trouble every time they go up against him. The 4 captains under him are Gol, Ganon, Jin, and Min, and like I said, they're all pretty one-note and have one personality trait that they harp on until they're inevitably killed off. All except for Captain Min, which is honestly fine because she has the coolest design out of all of them, and her metal armor has chainsaw arms. Eventually, Kane realizes that as they are, they just can't beat Gundam. Luckily, one of the main Dragoon pilots, Major Yam, is the grandson of a man who once fought Gundam and was said to be his equal. So, cue an episode where Kane goes off on a journey into the Chinese wilderness to find an old Japanese swordsman on top of a mountain and learn a super cool sword technique, and then come back and totally destroy Gundam's mech in one attack. And no, they never used the sword technique again after that. Yep, it's pretty dumb, honestly. Gundam doesn't die from this. Instead, he rushes back to his secret base and retrieves a giant metal armor known as the Gilgazamine. This ultimate metal armor has a system that hooks directly into the pilot's nervous system, so that it can be controlled via thought. However, it also tends to overload the brain and cause the user to fly into a berserker-like rage. Gundam experiences this himself and kills Jin in his anger. The Gilgazamine is pretty damn cool. I like how much bigger it is than any other metal armor in the series. Plus, it has a bunch of different weapons and presents a unique challenge to Kane and the others. The Dragonar finally find the secret facility and blow up its nuclear reactor, ultimately defeating Gundam outside in a combo of teamwork and Kane's skill with his beam saber. How cool the Zamine is totally undercut by the arrival of a Giganos major named Heidelnecken. He shows up right after Gundam dies, and he also has a Gilgazamine that was built at a competing factory in space. Heidelnecken sucks though, and the Dragonar blow him up in one episode, though he lives for a while longer and persists as a fairly pathetic foil to both Min and Mayo Plato. The one saving grace of this entire arc is the B-plot that involves Mayo being recalled to the Giganos motherland, the Moon. The Federation's newfound success with its Dragoon metal armor has put a lot of pressure on the politicians back home, and members of the Imperial Guard have formed a party in opposition of the current leadership. They are threatening physical action if their demands aren't met, and they happen to be Mayo's underlings from earlier in the show. Mayo is asked by Marshal Giltor to help negotiate with them, and a huge asshole named Dorchinov is constantly pushing to just exterminate them. Giltor is torn between the two, and it all comes to a head when Dorchinov shoots the Marshal and pins the blame on Mayo, causing the Blue Hawk to flee the Moon, crash landing on an island on Earth. That part of the arc is pretty fun, but again, it's a B-plot spread among 14 episodes. The final arc of the show sees the Dragonar go up against Giganos' ultimate weapon, a giant space fortress that looks like a skull. It's also piloted by a bunch of guys all hooked up to the same system as the Gilgazamine. Professor Plato comes up with a plan to overload the pilot's brains by hitting the fortress with an immense amount of energy all at once. So they end up using a power generation satellite to blast the fortress and allow the Dragonar to infiltrate and blow it up from the inside. While operating in space, the entire Federation gets a broadcast from the fortress asking for a truce, but it's just a ruse. Kane recognizes the voice on the radio as his mother, which is kind of the mother of all coincidences, and he goes to surrender to Giganos in order to save her. Dorchinov uses Kane to defend the station from the Federation fleet, saying that if he follows his orders, Kane will be reunited with his mother. Kane does defend the station, but takes special care only to disable incoming metal armors. Luckily, Tap, Light, and Rooney are able to convince the commander that all they need to do is simply rescue Kane's mother from the exploding fortress, and it will be all good. Professor Plato also asks the commander to let them attempt the rescue when they learn that his son Mayo has invaded the fortress to kill Dorchinov. Finally, Mayo gets to shine as he takes his practice squad along with the surviving Captain Min into the base to kill his archenemy. All of the heroes make a daring rescue attempt, with Linda and Rooney busting into the exploding fortress and fighting their way to Kane's mother. Meanwhile, things go south for Dorchinov as Min tricks him into accidentally confessing that he killed Giltor over the radio, and then she chases him while going "Muda Muda Muda Muda" like Dio. Man, this fortress has been exploding for like 4 or 5 episodes now. It's like the mecha version of Namek will explode in 5 minutes. Finally, Mayo finds Dorchinov and chases him to a church that's inside the fortress, and they have a mech sword fight. Dorchinov loses, but his mech grapples Mayo's and self-destructs, which seems bad, but in the next episode, Mayo's totally fine. It wasn't really even an inconvenience. I mean, his metal armor is still shiny. Unless there's a car wash for mechs. A mecha wash? Somewhere on this fortress. I mean, the thing is exploding and spiraling towards the moon's surface at this point, but the Waffle House is still open, so I think it's all good. Dorchinov shows back up with another Gilgazamine and attacks Mayo's group. They have trouble with him until Kane and the D1 show up, and they do a cool combo attack on him. Mayo decides to die on the crashing fortress until Professor Plato shows up in a Dragoon to talk to him. The others leave, and the father and son have a talk about conviction and principle, and just when you think they don't make it out in time, they come flying out of the explosion, and the Dragonar rush out to meet them. Metal Armor Dragonar feels like the distilled final product of what I think when someone says 80s mecha anime. Now for me, that pretty much means I was entertained all the way through, and I found the show to be a very enjoyable watch. But I can't ignore the issues that keep it from being one of the greats. For one, the pacing is all over the place. Sometimes you get arcs that only last a few episodes, and sometimes you get a 14 episode long stint where the main characters just sort of wander around the Chinese wilderness until the show just sort of moves on. Beyond the Gundam criticism, there is the fact that a lot of the story just boils down to the Dragonar having to move from point A to point B. The villains in the show are also pretty forgettable. Gundam is probably the best out of all of them, but I got tired of his shtick about halfway through his run. Dorchinov is introduced halfway into the show and is pretty boring. He really has no motivation other than wanting power for himself. For the ultimate villain, he was pretty lackluster, and then there's the fact that they lay out all these plot hooks for Light and Tap that they never follow up on. Light being the son of a British lord is such a weird thing to include if you don't do anything with it. On the plus side, the characters are all well written on the Federation side. Watching the relationships between the 3 main pilots and their friends really is a highlight. Kane, Tap, and Light are actually written like older teens. but the jokey tone never really gets in the way of how serious their situation is. I think it is fairly similar in feeling to Double Zeta, but personally I think the side characters in Metal Armor Dragonar are actually more interesting. The mecha designs are all beautiful, even if they reuse a couple of them a little bit too much, and while they do reuse some animation a fair bit, it doesn't stand out too much because they're all usually very fast cuts. All in all, Metal Armor Dragonar was an enjoyable time, and I feel like I can recommend it if you enjoy 80s military sci-fi and are okay with the pitfalls that it brings. Honestly, this show could really do with a compilation movie or an OVA remake because there's definitely cool stuff to salvage here. Let me know down below what you thought of Metal Armor Dragonar, or if you haven't seen it, are you going to take that journey now? Thank you for watching, and I will see you again soon. Hey everyone, welcome to today's end card. Let's start off as always by thanking our channel members, aka Batosai, Brian Sanchez, D. Mells, Daniel Johnson, oh my god, I think I almost just died. Deader V, Dillasol 22, Gert, Joe Castellanos, Joe Cavazos, John Lamb, Johnny G, Canto 20, McLean Nugent, Mr. Smash, Zappa, Slave, Video Gamer 75, Trey Hardy, Sindustries, and Harmonious. Thank you all so much for being a member of the channel, giving me a tip because you think I do a good job. Good for me, thank you. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry, I have hiccups right now. I decided to record the end card when my body is telling me to crawl into a hole. I don't know. I'm feeling wacky today, apparently. I haven't talked to you guys in a while. Actually, it's been like a month, and I didn't plan for there to be a month between this video and the Budokai video, but a lot of stuff happened. I was having PC trouble for the last couple of weeks, and what I ended up doing was just like actually buying more RAM. I really needed more RAM. My PC didn't really even have the minimum amount of RAM it needed in it to run DaVinci Resolve, so that issue is fixed, and it immediately fixed like all the crashes I was having with my PC. So that was easy. Installing RAM's easy, and we're good to go on that front. There's just been a lot of stuff going on with life. It's spring, you know, a time of change, a time of rebirth, one might say. Not for me, there have been no births, but yeah, just life. I hope you all are doing well. Guess the only other thing I have to announce is next is Gundam Reconquista. Sorry, that's how it is, right? Reconquista in G. That's going to be coming out next for a video. That shouldn't be too long. That's the weirdest Gundam show I've ever fucking seen. Just throwing it out there. I'm like, as of recording this, I'm a little over halfway through the show, and I don't even know what my opinion is yet. It's so fucking weird. And then after that is Zoids, the first 33 episode arc of the first Zoids show, commonly referred to as Zoids Chaotic Century. And that show's awesome, actually. I've come back around on Zoids. I used to think Zoids was shit. Unfortunately, like, I saw it as a kid a lot, and then, I don't know, for some reason in my brain I was like, whatever, Zoids is like some shitty show for dumb kids. I guess probably because I only ever saw the dub, because I started watching the sub for this channel, because I figured Zoids was actually probably good, because my opinion on media when I was a teenager was terrible. So yeah, really enjoying Zoids a lot, and that should be probably the end of May. I think that video will be out. Then after that, I don't know yet. I'm thinking of doing Armor Hunter Mellow Link, because it's short, and it will give me a nice stopgap before another long series. Anyway, thank you all for watching. This was a longer end card than usual, so we'll probably switch it up with the music. Oh, one more thing. There is a big announcement coming over on the gaming channel. I think I'll do like a full channel, like a channel update for both this channel and the gaming channel. I'll probably just post it over there, and then like repost it here as a community post, so people who want to see it can see it. because I've got something kind of cool planned over there for summer that I want to like also cover over here. I know gaming videos are a lot less popular on this channel, but usually when I work on a gaming video and put a gaming video out, it's like, okay, this one's for me. All right, you know, I say this one's for you, this one's for you, and then this one's for me. So yeah, I feel good about it. I hope you all are feeling good out there. It's always good to hear from you. We should see you again very soon, and I'm gonna shut up because this end card's long as hell. So you guys all have a great weekend, and I will see you all again very soon.